almost certain that there's some explanation for how it all started that isn't that he actually raised from the dead.
That was appalling. When you start doing that sort of stuff, you make it clear that you are against it, because it's never enough to just be like, no, I don't believe. It seems like so many people who don't believe have to go out of their way to trash the faith, trash what Jesus Christ did, and completely blaspheme even things like the resurrection, one of the most profound things of our faith, our Catholic faith. What's up, everybody? It's Chicago talk show host, and in this reaction video, I'll be discussing the video I just recently saw, Why I Left Christianity, with Rhett McLaughlin. Guys, I gotta tell you, that was an absolute shit show. I could barely watch it. Now, I know that's some strong words, but there were some strong words said in that interview, and a lot of it was absolute horse hogwash. A lot of it was inventing stuff. A lot of it was twisting the gospel and what Jesus is about. A lot of it is just half-assing the faith of believing some things, agreeing with Jesus in some things, but totally dismissing other things about the faith. You can't have it both ways. So why I'm doing this reaction video is I kind of knew ahead of time what this guy was going to say. I think what's going on here is what we're seeing is the modern mentality, all right? The person today, the modern, living in these modern times, and then their personality, their reasoning, right? Their rationalizing of their decadence, right? This is what we're talking about. And what I'm going to do in this reaction video is connect two different E. Michael Jones books and illustrate to you how the modern thinks and the errors, the grave errors in that thinking.
I mean, God is just creating animals willy-nilly.
And there's animals that are getting more and more like a person before the people.
Yeah, it's like God is just sort of doing little trial runs or something.
Right. I mean, what does that say about God is what I was thinking.
Wow. Guys, this is hubris. This is hubris talking on so many different levels. But let's break it down. God does not create things willy-nilly. God has a plan for your life, and God has a plan for human history. You're free to reject that and do your nilly-willy ways, but that is not God. Everything that God does and has done is with purpose, but you are entirely, we as a people, are entirely, infinitely unable to comprehend that plan, because guess what? You're not God. And this idea of, it's just disgusting, this idea of this animals being more like a person. What animal is learning how to talk? Which animal? Are penguins taking English classes? And this idea that, you can't comprehend it, so you start coming up with inventing nonsense that God is doing these trial runs. Listen to yourself. That's pride talking. You think you know what God is doing, but you have no idea. I recommend you both humble yourself. What I want to do now is go into the book Degenerate Moderns, written by E. Michael Jones. It's Modernity as Rationalized Sexual Misbehavior, to get some insight here. And I think this gets close, and if not the heart of where we're at with these, what's going on here with these two people talking, right? So listen to this. So E. Michael Jones, in the introduction, he's talking about a book by Paul Johnson called Intellectuals. Listen to this. E. Michael Jones writes, as a result, Johnson loses an opportunity to make a bigger point with readers who are naturally on his side. Intellectuals, he tells us, are free spirits, adventurers of the mind. With the decline of clerical power in the 18th century, a new kind of mentor emerged to fill the vacuum and capture the ear of society. This secular intellectual might be a deist, skeptic, or atheist, but he was just as ready as any pontiff or presbyterer to tell mankind how to conduct its affairs. E. Michael Jones writes, put more generally, The idea can be formulated thus. The intellectual life is a function of the moral life of the thinker. In order to apprehend truth, which is the goal of the intellectual life, one must live a moral life. One can produce intellectual product, but to the extent that one prescinds from living the moral life, that product will be more a function of internal desire, wish fulfillment, if you will, than external reality. We're going to take it home with this passage too. E. Michael Jones writes, when the intellectual sets up shop in rebellion against the moral law, and therefore in rebellion against the truth, all the modern isms follow as a direct result of this rebellion. All of them entail rationalization. All of them can be best understood in light of the moral disorder of their founders, proponents, and adherents. Whew. Let me know what you think about that, because I think that's what's going on.
Experience, right? So now, as someone who doesn't really know what I think about God, I still recognize like the emptiness of a place like Las Vegas. But I'm also like, you know what? Maybe every once in a while I want to go experience some excess pleasures.
Yeah. Oh, it was fun.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not judge myself or judge others for it at the same time.
Here it comes. But you don't want to be judged for it, right? This pleasure that you're doing. And I got to ask, what are you doing that could be considered shameful that you'll get judged for it in the pursuit of this excess pleasure? There's a difference, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that if I take the perspective into that, oh, I recognize the emptiness of this. Eating at a buffet. I mean, how many times can you eat at a buffet, right?
Yeah.
Before you're like, okay, get me out of the buffets.
So listen to this man's speech and what he's saying, because it's going to show you how there's a inner conflict there, and he's cognizant of it. So he understands and recognizes how empty a place like Las Vegas is, right? Sin City. But at the same time, like a good modern, he wants to let loose, right? Indulge in excess pleasures, right? And that's the key word. Who's watched Pinocchio? Who's watched Pinocchio and Pleasure Island? There's a lesson to be learned there. It's not what it is all cracked up to be. And after a while, the buffet of gorging yourself on pleasure, it corrupts people. It can corrupt people. And it could, and that's the dangerous part, but you don't see that right away because you're too busy wanting that pleasure.
Is kind of the perspective that I think about the way that I thought about those students when I was there with the truth in my hand. I was like, there's two paths here. There's the path that you're on, which is just self-sabotage, or there's Jesus. Never considering that, well, maybe there's a few more ways to think about these things.
Do you think there's pride in there?
You had the truth. You said it yourself. You recognized it, and you chose not to listen to it. And I think a lot of it makes me think of being seduced and tempted by the devil. As soon as you start talking about that you know the truth about Jesus Christ, okay? And then you start thinking, oh, well, maybe there's like some other way around this sort of thing, and maybe we don't have to use Jesus. This is a satanic temptation. It makes me think of Jesus when he was tempted by the devil, fasting for 40 days in the desert. It's the same vibe.
Think about that issue in particular.
Sure.
But I picked up a book from an astronomer, Hugh Ross. And I'm sure, I've mentioned this before, and he has a Christian ministry that is like very anti-evolution, but very pro old universe from the standpoint of astronomy, which...
A book written by an astronomer? Old universe? What are you talking about? So what you're telling us is you read a book from written by an astronomer, and you're picking that over the gospel, over the Bible, over what you just acknowledged was the truth. So what you're doing is looking to as an alternative. This is what's happening. It's not shocking. What is shocking is the level of hubris. Okay, so once again, we're going to dig back into Degenerate Moderns by E. Michael Jones to get some more context and some more insight as to what I think is happening here. And so without further ado, in the epilogue, E. Michael Jones writes, modernity has exploded itself. First of all, by the intellectual overreaching of the deconstructors who have rehabilitated metaphysics by their attacks on it. Once the moderns extended the methodology of debunking to its ultimate extension to encompass metaphysics, they ended up debunking themselves. Commenting on those who wanted proof for first principles, Aristotle commented in the Metaphysics that some indeed, from lack of education, demand that this principle, i.e. the principle of non-contradiction, to be demonstrated, for it is a lack of education to know that it necessary to seek demonstration of some propositions and not of others. For there cannot be a demonstration of everything altogether. There would then be an infinite regress, and hence there would still be no final demonstration. But if there are proportions of which it is necessary to seek a demonstration, then those who refuse to admit ours ought to say what principle they would rather accept. E. Michael Jones says, so it turns out that the rise of deconstruction was the result of more than anything else, lack of education. We're going to keep cooking. E. Michael Jones writes, since they chose desire over truth, the explication of their desires debunked their entire intellectual system. The residue at the bottom of the flask was ultimately their unrepented sins. The desires that became so important they overwhelmed everything else, including their desire to tell the truth and their ability to make sense. EMJ continues, the final debunking of modernity has taken place. The moderns and their theories were debunked by their own dissolute lives. Absolutely true. EMJ continues, this doctrine was known in classical philosophy as the doctrine of connaturality. It is the basis of the education of children, who must first be taught to live in a certain way before they can apprehend the truth. It flies, we need not be reminded, in the face of all the materialisms of our culture, which seems to talk about the intellectual life as a simple function of intelligence, which can be reduced to a number which is known as IQ, as our IQ. Our intelligence, our mind, all of our faculties are at the beck and call of the will, which can choose to use or abuse what it has at its disposal. A mind clouded by passion is like a window covered with dirt. It is not transparent. It is aware only of itself. Virtually all of the artistic breakthroughs of the modern age, stream of consciousness comes most immediately to mind, is a function of the mind turned away from the truth and focused on its own desires instead. The turning away from the truth at the behest of disordered passions does not mean that the mind will stop functioning. It only means that the mind will not perceive the truth. And after a period of laboring in the dark, the mind can choose disorder over order and create for itself idols, which it will serve instead of the truth placed in the universe by the Creator, who is synonymous with truth. Is this not what's happening so far? Keep these words in mind. Keep those words in mind as I do all these other clips and go through them, and it's going to keep coming up. And I think what's dangerous about this whole thing is it's one thing to not know the truth, but it's an entirely different thing to know the truth and then ignore it or dismiss it and then go to other places searching for quote unquote truth. Like an astronomer. Here's an idea. Instead of reading a book on people like astronomers, why don't you try reading some Aquinas? Read some St. Augustine. Read some C.S. Lewis. Read some Tolkien. Right? Read some Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. Read Crime and Punishment. I could go on. There's so many better sources for this kind of information, and all you got to do is look at the classics. A lot of the classics in literature, they're way more profound than anything this astronomer has to write. I can guarantee it.
To the Christian, and a lot of Christians today just accept evolution. They're like, yeah, sure, humans all have a common ancestor with other animals. The biggest problem that I think it poses is the seeming like arbitrariness with which you have to say that, presuming that our apish ancestors don't get to inherit eternal life.
I mean, talk about, this is just nauseating. So people will think whatever they want, but the faith holds that we were created. Go back in Genesis and read it. Again, it's up to you if you want to believe in it, and if you don't, then don't. Apish ancestors, stop it. Just stop. And this idea of you're inventing stuff. Oh, apish ancestors, and that they don't get eternal life. We are not animals. All right? We are human beings. And the biggest reasons that we are separated from animals is because you're able to talk. You're able to have this discussion with this long-haired dude about inventing stuff and insulting the faith. And guess what? A bear can't do that. A bird can't do that. So they are not the same.
Right, because when I didn't really buy into the progressive creationism thing, but I was so sure that evolution didn't happen. I was like, when you're raised in the Christian faith, and the only exposure to the idea of evolution you've ever had has come through the filter of a Christian scientist telling you why it's not legitimate. Somebody comes into your church and they're like the evolution expert, and they're like, they make it seem so impossible that you walk out of that with a full affirmation of the idea that evolution definitely didn't happen. And it's a horrible explanation. It will be debunked by the scientists themselves within our lifetime. Like, that's the kind of stuff that we told ourselves, right?
Right.
And we firmly believed it. But because of this proposal, this progressive creationist idea, because the age of the universe.
Progressive creationism? Where'd you get that? All right, so before I tear this apart, we're going to start with a quote from G.K. Chesterton, the everlasting man, in the book Logos Rising, The History of Ultimate Reality by E. Michael Jones. So bear with me, I'm going to read quite a few passages, but I'm going to set up a framework. I'm going to start with this quote, and then I'm going to touch on a couple of things about evolution from this book. So let's get into it. Listen to this quote, G.K. Chesterton. This is from E. Michael Jones's book, Logos Rising. G.K. Chesterton writes, "And I have noticed that most modern history is driven to something like sophistry. First, to soften the sharp transition from animals to men. Most modern histories of mankind begin with the word evolution and with a rather wordy exposition of evolution, for much the same reason that operated in this case. There is something slow and soothing and gradual about the word and even about the idea. As a matter of fact, it is not touching these primary things, a very practical word or a very profitable idea. Nobody can imagine how nothing could turn into something. Nobody can get an inch nearer to it by explaining how something could turn into something else. It is really far more logical to start by saying, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Even if you only mean, in the beginning, some unthinkable power began some unthinkable process. In other words, every sane sort of history must begin with man as man, a thing standing absolute and alone. How he came there, or indeed how anything else came there, is a thing for theologians and philosophers and scientists, and not for historians. That being said, let's get to the next passage. Okay, so in chapter 1, the beginning of everything from Logos Rising by E. Michael Jones, there you go. He writes, "It soon became apparent that metaphysics, which deals with being qua being, and therefore the being, who is simultaneously necessary existence and necessary essence, was not their strong suit. Ironically, the man who made the biggest philosophical gaffe was Daniel Dennett, the Gang of Four's only philosopher. In his book, Breaking the Spell, Dennett insists the universe, quote, performs a version of the ultimate bootstrapping trick. It creates itself ex nihilo. Or, at any rate, out of something that is well nigh indistinguishable from nothing at all. EMJ writes, there is no third thing between being and non-being. If anything at all exists, however ethereal, it is something, and therefore not nothing. Stay with me. EMJ writes, so something, even if it is very small, is not nothing. If there is nothing, there is not something. If there is something, no matter how small, then the universe is already in existence. You would think that someone trained in philosophy would understand that there is no intermediary stage between being and nothing. But if something that obvious escaped his notice, it should come as no surprise that he missed the obvious error in his main statement. The universe created itself ex nihilo. EMJ writes, in order to bring itself into existence, the universe would have to exist before it existed. So in this next passage, in the same chapter, chapter 1, the beginning of everything, we'll continue this thought. Dr. E. Michael Jones writes, at some point, whatever it was could not see. At the next point, it could. And Dawkins is incapable of explaining how it got from point A to point B. Instead, he invokes natural selection as his stand-in for what he can't explain. He then covers this inability to explain change, and therefore evolution, by raising a cloud of rhetorical dust which attempts to obscure the issue by making it a question of probability and small intermediary steps. Creationism, he tells us, citing his favorite whipping boy, who attempt to deploy the argument from improbability in their favor, always assume that biological adaptation is a question of the jackpot or nothing. Either the eye sees or it doesn't. Either the wing flies or it doesn't. There are assumed to be no useful intermediates. But this is simply wrong. Such intermediates abound in practice, which is exactly what we would expect in theory. E. Michael Jones writes, Dawkins here inadvertently makes our metaphysical point for us. Quote, either the eye sees or it doesn't. Either the wing flies or it doesn't. He writes, there is, in other words, no intermediate position between being and non-being, or to use Dawkins' example, between seeing and non-seeing. By invoking Mount Improbable against the creationists, Dawkins digs himself deeper and deeper into a philosophical hole of his own making, from which there is no escape. So this is Dawkins talking here, and Dawkins writes, real life seeks out the gentle slopes of the back of Mount Improbable, while the creationists are blind to all but the daunting precipice at the front. Darwin singled out the eye as posing a particular challenging problem. Quote, to suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. And so as I read this stuff to you, he's pointing out how when people get away from the truth and they start inventing things, it just comes out absurd and absolutely preposterous. It becomes irrational, but that's the whole point, because the enemy for these moderns is the truth, right? Here's another passage. So E. Michael Jones continues and he writes, because scientific progress is impossible without an understanding of purpose, it comes as no surprise that Dawkins is at war with any notion of purpose in the universe. In this, Dawkins is doing nothing more than carrying Newton's banishment of teleology from the universe, so its logical conclusion in atheism, and inadvertently the extinction of the very possibility of science as well. Evolution, as a result, ends up discrediting the mind which created it. E. Michael Jones writes, what of all of Dawkins' quote, somersaults in logic, end quote, have in common is his phobic avoidance of the necessity of a creator. His claim, quote, that there is no need to invoke a creator, end quote, flies in the face of the inescapable impression that, quote, the primordial set of those particles is designed, end quote. Every single thing in the universe is specific, and it is specific because it has a purpose. And it has a purpose because it was created with some end in mind. Here's my final point. E. Michael Jones writes, when evolutionists like George C. Simpson claim that, quote, man is the result of purposeless and materialistic process that does not have him in mind, he was not planned, end quote, they affirm nothing more that, quote, they resent truth because they prefer lies over the restrictions, brackets, on their behavior that follow accepting truth. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. These guys are sitting here in their crazy fancy studio, right? They got this, they're talking about God's plan being so random, right? That's not true. These are lies. So there you have it. What did you think about those passages? Do you see how they connect with the conversation? You've got one dude saying that, God's plan, there's trial and error, suggesting that he doesn't know what he's doing. Both of them do that. You got the host saying that God's ways are just random. Stop it. This is insulting. All right. Again, you can choose to ignore and not be a part of the faith because we all have free will. But just stop inventing stuff. Stop muddying the waters. This is an incredible disservice towards people, and you're going to have to be responsible for that.
Like me, was a person of faith, of Christian faith, and is no longer a person of Christian faith. Or, I've got some faith in things, but not really religious faith.
You got some faith in some things, but not religious faith. Why are you using that word then? What is the secular equivalent of a word like faith? Because you have to be faithful to have faith. And if you don't have faith in God, what are you putting your faith in? Because you can't serve two masters.
Kind of like, I don't think so. I'm not super motivated to figure that out, but
yeah, very, very LA sort of. I don't know, man. Let's not put a label on it, man.
And this is I think it's, Britt Hartley, who I'm a fan of, who wrote No Nonsense Spirituality. Mm-hmm. She's quick to point out that this is certainly a position of privilege, right? I am a successful entertainer who lives in Los Angeles mm-hmm. and has all my basic needs taken care of, and I can approach these things with just a passive intellectual curiosity.
Right.
I'm not fighting for my life. I'm not at risk because of the things that I believe. These statements may cause people to not like me, but I'm not, I'm not being persecuted in any way. Yeah. And also, I'm not living the kind of life where I need desperately to have hope that there is some sort of ultimate resurrection, that there is some sort, everything will be made right in the end because my life is so bad. My life is great, comparatively.
Oh, I've got all this money. I'm living in LA. I'm so popular. I've got all this success. My life is great. Oh yeah, it's so great, right? Wait till tragedy happens. Sooner or later, it's coming. Chaos, baby. It's coming. Sooner or later. And then what are you going to do? You know, you have to count your blessings. It is because of God that you get to wake up every day and live another life. It is because of God that He gave you these talents that you have to use to bring glory to Him. No, it's wrong to start thinking to yourself, no, it's you put yourself on a pedestal that you're great because of your ability, because it's your life, but you didn't make yourself. You may have learned some stuff and everything, right? But you have all these blessings, and you're so proud to be like, yeah, it's all, I did this. Stop it. It's just stop it. I think a lot of people like that are in for a rude awakening as soon as tragedy and real hardships that can happen. People's lives can change like that, right? But you don't see that. You don't see all those blessings that you have, right? What's the difference between Las Vegas and a place like LA? They're both known to be belly of the beasts and places of hell pits of sin.
Can get. I mean, you could just ask ChatGPT to give you a primer on evolution.
Just ask ChatGPT. I mean, do you see the message that's happening? That's right. Just don't think about it. Just let the machine do the thinking for you. Go to AI, type in, learn about God, learn about Jesus, learn about evolution. Just go to the machine, right? Here's a better idea. If you want to learn about Jesus, open up the Bible and read the Bible. Don't go to ChatGPT.
I don't know exactly what happened with Jesus. I don't know the nature of specifically the nature of his death. Like, was he left on the cross? Was he thrown into a large, like mass grave? Was he put into a rich man's grave by Joseph of Arimathea? Was that invented? I don't know.
You don't know what happened because you don't want to know, or you do know, but you rejected it. This is willful ignorance. Anybody can do this. You could pretend like the information isn't out there, but it is. Okay, and then the mass graves? Are we talking about some World War II thing or some crazy stuff like that has to do with war and mass? What are you talking about? A rich man's grave? Again, and inventing? You're the one inventing stuff. Stop it. Where are you getting this stuff? What movies have you watched or whatever? Read the Bible. Read it. And if you have read it, clearly it seems that you don't like what it has to say. And hey, again, we all have free will. And go ahead and do it your way. See what happens. I don't recommend it though.
Almost certain that there's some explanation for how it all started that isn't that he actually raised from the dead.
That was appalling. When he says something like that about Jesus, which is blasphemy, and you start giggling it like a little imp, that was messed up to see, man. Again, you can have that choice to not believe, but as soon as you start insulting the faith with these crackpot ideas, when you start doing that sort of stuff, you make it clear that you are against it, because it's never enough to just be like, no, I don't believe. It seems like so many people who don't believe have to go out of their way to trash the faith, trash what Jesus Christ did, and completely blaspheme even things like the resurrection, one of the most profound things of our faith, our Catholic faith, and is in the YouTube algorithm loves it, right? Every time you trash on the faith, the Catholic faith, and of course it's gonna promote people who are talking about how they left their faith because that's what they want.
Support that it's super fascinating, but I also find this need to be like, yeah, but what was he about? Like, I don't know what the man who lived, that I do believe lived, I don't know what he actually said. I don't know like what's the percentage of the record that we have. But whatever, we have this movement that was started and they wrote these things, and like some of these ideas are really beautiful. Like from a moral standpoint, like the things that Jesus asked you to do, being selfless, being service oriented, caring about the poor and the needy, not just being about your own accumulation of your possessions, recognizing the emptiness in the accumulation of possessions. Like, these are beautiful ideas that I subscribe to today.
So again, this is more self-imposed blindness. What do you mean you don't know anything about you know about the New Testament. Go read it. Did you not read about the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount? Go read it. I'm pointing that way. That's where I keep my Bible. You got all this money, go get a Bible and refresh yourself. It's not that hard, dude. I wouldn't recommend asking GPT what Jesus did. Go to the Bible. And again, the double talk again comes out. Did you hear it? There's that inner conflict. He recognizes that the accumulating of worldly things, in this case, he uses the words, the accumulation of possessions, right, being empty, but the very same thing could be said about the accumulation of excess pleasure, right? Oh, well, we don't want to talk about that, right? But they're not so different. And so once again, the hallmark quality of the modern is wanting to have it both ways. Bake that cake and eat it too. You can't have it both ways because people can see that split. There's a profound, a sharp distinction between what you say and then what you're doing, right? And people can see through that all day, every day.
Is this like, I want to rescue Jesus from the hands of the people who are using him for evil.
Yeah, because they're pretty out of line. I mean, Jesus says this.
All right, so this part's really staggering in terms of pride and hubris. Let me get this straight. You want to save Jesus? Stop. It's the other way around. You do not save Jesus. Jesus saves you. And by the sound of it, it looks like you really need Jesus to save you because these things that you're saying absolutely make no sense. And the defense seems to be, oh, it doesn't make sense to me. And what Jesus said, I don't know what Jesus says, but you're not looking to find out what Jesus said, right? Or maybe you have looked because apparently you talked to kids about this back when you were younger or teens or whatever, or youth. And you talked about the faith, and back then when you defended the faith, right? But now it's just like you're pretending like, oh yeah, no, that's totally, you got some selective amnesia. I don't know what he said. Yes, you do. It seems like you do. But what it seems like is happening again is a rejection of what Jesus said and the Beatitudes and what the Bible said, the commandment and the 10 Commandments and so on. It's really not that hard. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this reaction video. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, comment, and let me know what you think. Thank you so much again. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.